Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on our webinar series where today we're going to be looking at future-ready facilities. Specifically, how can you transform your workspaces into smart building technology and gain insights from that? My name is Kim Jackson, and I'm joining you from Houston, Texas. Please, as you're watching this, share in the comments where you're joining us from so that we'll be able to know kind of the region where you're at. We are going to also be looking at your questions and comments, and the speakers will be able to address those as well. So, today's world, FMs are increasingly having that pivotal role in core business goals. So, driving emissions reduction, resource efficiency, and occupancy well-being. Love to invite Lisa to join me today. She is going to be taking through the panel and everybody that's going to be talking about this with IFMA's partner, Trane and Nuvolo. So Lisa, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today, hosted by Trane and Nuvolo. Like Kim said, I'm Lisa from Nuvolo, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. I'd like to remind everyone that the recording is going to be available for playback post-event, and we absolutely encourage questions throughout the presentation to be dropped into the comments box, and at the end of the session, we'll be taking questions that you asked. I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Alessandro Araldi. Alessandro is the Vice President of Digital Products at Trane. A little background on Alessandro. He is, like I said, the VP of Digital Products for Trane's commercial business. He drives innovation through controls, SaaS, and IoT solutions to deliver economic outcomes to building owner and managers, ranging from improved energy and operational efficiency to extended equipment lifetime and uptime to decarbonization, compliance, and comfort. Welcome, Alessandro. Our second presenter today is Ethan Smith. Ethan Smith is the VP and Head of Strategy and Operations from Nuvolo. A little background on Ethan is he's a software leader with a dedicated focus on smart technology, specifically in the life sciences industry, but also has general awareness of all markets. He first joined Nuvolo to spearhead the company's life sciences business and now acts as the Head of Strategy and Operations through the company's growth. His expertise includes developing regulated cloud platforms, executing large-scale digital transformation programs, and defining product strategy to drive market leadership. So welcome, Ethan. Excited to hear from you today. Before I hand it over to our presenters, I do just want to walk through our agenda. We'll be covering a few topics today, like Kip mentioned. We're talking about smart building technology. We'll first go through what can smart buildings deliver. We'll talk through why upgrade, why integrate, pivot over to how can you be opportunistic about this change, give you a few real world examples. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be some Q&A at the end. So don't forget to drop those comments in. I'm going to hand it over to, I believe it's Ethan or Alessandro to get us started on the presentation.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Thanks, Kim. And thank you to everyone who's joining from lots of places around the world. I can see some of those coming in through the chat panel now on multiple platforms that we're streaming across. So thank you for joining us today. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Ethan Smith, and I'm going to jump into the first section of the presentation today. And I do encourage everyone to drop comments and questions in. We have a great team behind the scenes that'll help Alessandro and I facilitate those questions and hopefully answer as many of them as possible throughout the presentation and then during the Q&A session. So when we talk about what can smart buildings deliver, we wanted to set the stage here before we get really into the technology details behind it. And I think we all know at some level, but it's worth spending a moment to talk about in terms of where the world is today. We know we've been through lots of change in the last 5 years, and 10 or 15 years beyond that, but the last 5 in particular. And really that's forced the dynamic between buildings and the people that occupy them to advance and to change very rapidly. And that obviously has a huge effect on the equipment, the assets, and the controls that are in those buildings and helping them perform at their best. And really, smart buildings are designed to operate more on data, along with their modern controls to help consolidate the information. And ultimately, it's really about improving performance, streamlining those operations, and increasing efficiency. And the reality is, which we're going to talk more about throughout the hour, is that you can do this without needing a full rip and replace. There are other improvements that are more incremental that can actually deliver quite impressive ROI. So let's pause for a second here and talk about what a smart building is. It's a term that's used quite a lot. We tend to rely on a definition by BISRA, which basically it says that smart buildings are buildings that connect technologies and automate processes with the goal of improving their performance by continuously learning, adapting, and responding. Sounds a little bit AI-ish if you're familiar with the way that AI promotes itself, but we were doing smart building applications prior to AI joining the world. But that is something that we're going to continue to advance in to help us deliver more value through connected buildings themselves. And not to bury the lead, but the market is ready for this. And many of you being facilities leaders, experts, veterans, probably already know this, but it is important to look at a few stats from a Facilio state of the market from last year. So these stats are pretty current in terms of getting responses from the market. And then after this, we're gonna look at some real-time stats. So get ready for that. So what we've learned as we've looked at the data from this Facilio study is that 87% of businesses, and it's a large majority, are looking to optimize their existing systems. And that really is a very strong indicator of the movement towards data-driven improvements, right? So they're not saying that they're going to rip and replace, but they're going to optimize them. And that's one of the themes that you're going to hear throughout our discussion today is looking at ways that you can leverage things that you already have by connecting them, by upgrading them, by enabling them, and getting the data out of them to make better decisions and to let your buildings perform better. 78% of businesses are prioritizing connected ecosystems. This speaks to the power of bringing the information together. That's one of Nuvolo and Trane's core strengths. It's part of the reason why Nuvolo is now part of the Trane Technologies family, is to bring things together in a connected way. And kind of interesting, just to show maybe a stat that's a little less indicative, that some of us might disagree with, indicated that a third of businesses face challenges integrating these systems effectively. I'm a little curious as to whether the way that question was asked, I would have expected that number to be a bit higher. Perhaps that is more of an indicator that their systems really aren't capable of it, so they're not actually focusing on it. But kind of an interesting metric there, that only a third are saying that they're really facing challenges on that side. So maybe it's strides that organizations are making in moving in this direction, or maybe there might be a little bit of a bias in terms of the way that this was conducted. So in the spirit of that, we wanted to make this interactive. So everybody out there, grab your phones or open a browser window. You can go to menti.com directly in a browser window. You'll need to type in that code or scan the QR code, and it'll take you directly to a survey that we're going to do live here. And the question is, and I want to be really clear about the quotations here, is what percentage of buildings, in your view, have implemented several integrated smart technologies? Not one, not two smart technologies, but several. So take a moment, get your phone out or open up a link, jump into the Menti survey here, and we'll give it about 1 minute. I'll take a sip of water here, and then we'll look at some real-time results. So what percentage of buildings, in your view, have implemented several integrated smart technologies? We'll give it another few seconds here. All right. So there may be some more results that are coming in as we're talking through this. Seems like a pretty fair majority are kind of on the lower end, 0 to 25%. Only a handful thinking that we're getting, more than a quarter of buildings actually have several integrated technologies within them. So let's compare that with what Bizria has found. So kind of comparing our general thoughts with a leader, an organization that studies this every day. So they found, probably in relative alignment with what our audience suggested, that 50%, an entire 50%, are completely unconnected, and maybe that was represented in our 0 to 10%. And if you look at this a different way, and add in the 40% have some element, which probably isn't quite several. That's why the wording of the question was important. You're talking about 90% of buildings that really aren't in the kind of smart technology implemented state. So really what that tells us is the opportunity is vast. Let's look at it as an opportunity, not a challenge. And that's what we're going to talk about over the next little while. So I'm going to hand off to Alessandro, who's going to talk a bit about why we should upgrade.
Thank you, Ethan. So why upgrading? Obviously, we want to upgrade because we can achieve several benefits, economic benefits for your business, some of which can be easily quantified, others that might be less quantifiable, but nevertheless very tangible. And it all starts with what we call a building management system. I think all of you are familiar with what a BMS is. We also refer to it as a building automation system. What a BMS system is essentially the brain of a smart building. It really enables integration and coordination of all the different subsystems that exist in a building, whether it's a security system, a fire system, an HVAC system, your elevator, or any subsystem in your smart building can be integrated and then coordinated by a building management system or building automation system. And by centralizing that function, that enables us to essentially optimize the building performance and achieve some of the benefit or all of the benefit that we're going to explore in the next few slides. So the first obvious benefit, which is also the most easily quantifiable, is energy savings or energy efficiency, right? by essentially deploying a modern BMS. And when we talk about the BMS, by the way, we certainly refer to the software, but fundamentally a BMS cannot work without the control infrastructure that exists behind, right? The supervisory control all the way down to the unit control that are attached to specific subsystems. So when we broadly speak about BMS, we intend the entirety of the software plus the control infrastructure, right? And by centralizing and integrating all the different subsystems, it really allows us to achieve significant energy savings. So if you look at some of the numbers on this slide, right, it's estimated that about 40% of all the electricity produced in North America is actually being consumed in buildings. So buildings are actually the largest source of electricity consumption. It's also estimated that about 30% of that electricity that is used in building is actually wasted for one reason or the other, right? So if you do the math, 30% or 40%, that's about 12% of total electricity produced in the US that somehow gets wasted in building. And about half of that is HVAC. Right? So by deploying a modern BMS system with the downstream control infrastructure, we can significantly reduce that waste, right? And achieve a significant energy savings that flow straight through the bottom line, right? Not to talk about, obviously, the significant benefit to the environment and the ability to achieve your sustainability goals. The other obvious benefit, maybe a little bit less quantifiable, but again, not less tangible. In fact, it's very tangible. It's a productivity, right? Whether you have a facility manager on site or some other, set of resources that you use to manage your building, right? Still today, an investment needs to be made, right, to manage buildings, right? And a modern BMS system really helps you become more productive or make the people who manage those buildings more productive in two fundamental ways. The first one is by automating a lot of the tasks, right, that otherwise would have to be done manually or semi-manually. Increasingly, those tasks can be automated according to a schedule of operation that can be predetermined, right? The second way that a BMS system really helps improve productivity is fundamentally by making available valuable and hopefully insightful information in the form of dashboard, report, analytics, and the likes, right? That really help the people who are managing the building stay informed and know what's happening at any point in time, right? Alarms are also a way that enable facility manager or people managing the building to understand if something is happening real time that requires immediate attention, okay? And I would say with the advent of AI, this productivity is now getting boosted to a whole new level, right? We have, for example, a new offering called ARIA, which really enables facility manager to interrogate the building real time about anything, and ARIA responds and essentially consolidates all that information and makes it available to you in natural language in a way that is very easy to consume and immediately pinpoint, specific issues, right? So really AI is helping boost productivity to a whole new level. There are other benefits beyond, energy efficiency or energy savings and productivity, some of which are listed here. Again, perhaps not easily quantifiable, but nevertheless very tangible. The first one is obviously improving the occupant comfort, right? Which is especially critical in certain type of environment. If you think about the hospitality industry, right? So whether it is hotels or restaurants and so on, but even healthcare, right? occupant comfort is absolutely critical. Another key benefit is obviously the ability to achieve your decarbonization and sustainability goals, which is to a great extent also linked to the energy savings benefit that we explored before. Another key one is regulatory compliance, because a BMS can actually store valuable information that can help you meet your regulatory reporting requirements. And then finally, really a modern BMS and the associated control infrastructure can help you reduce over time maintenance costs, right? And extend the lifetime of the underlying equipment, right? And as we said before, all of these benefits are now being dramatically boosted by the advent of AI technology, which is finding its way into BMS controls and the likes. In addition to the benefits that we have explored, upgrading to a modern BMS and control infrastructure can also help you reduce risk. And there are significant risks with aging infrastructure, right? The first most obvious one is the cybersecurity risk, right? Older systems are not as cyber secure as more modern ones. They also tend not to be updated consistently and frequently as they should, right? So you run a serious risk of a cyber attack if you don't have a more modern system in your building. The second risk is the obsolescence risk. If you look at the life cycle of control, that life cycle is getting shorter and shorter because controls are fundamentally electronics equipment, right? And the life cycle is getting shorter. So chances are that if you have an older infrastructure and at some point something breaks, you might not be able to find a like-for-like replacement, right? So I think it's important to get ahead of the curve and plan ahead before you get that obsolescence, situation, right? The other risk is a risk of aging workforce. If you think about people who are managing this building, right? Many of them have tremendous knowledge, which is fantastic, right? They can manage the building extremely well because they've been there for a long time. They know every part of the building. But what happens when they retire, right? It's becoming more and more difficult to find a skilled labor, right? And so it's important to upgrade to modern systems that are actually easier to use, easier to learn, and can also further automate how the building works, right? And make it easier going forward to manage that building. And then the last one is kind of the occupant risk. Back to what we discussed earlier, occupants are demanding more and more technologies in building. They are certainly demanding comfort, but they are also demanding more modern building, right? Which involves more automation, more technology, right? That can sense the occupant throughout the building and can take action according to the occupant preferences. And if you don't have that technology, depending on which business you are, you might find yourself at a competitive disadvantage. So we have now explored some of the key benefits, but also the risk of upgrading or not upgrading to a more modern BMS system and the associated control infrastructure. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ethan.
Thanks very much, Alessandro. That was super insightful, and I think it's set up well to talk about the next section of the talk today around why integrate. And back to the point of you probably have many of these components today. You may not have all of them, but shifting the same diagram that we looked at earlier in Alessandro's section over to the right here. BMS systems are probably very familiar to all of you as facilities leaders. And really what smart buildings are starting to do, it was evidenced in the Facilio study as well as the BISRIA information, is connecting together the things that you have to bring more value to the organization. And we're going to start to dive into that a little bit more in this section, talking about integrated workplace management systems, or IWMS, That is Nuvolo's legacy and what we are most known for in the market. IWMS includes a lot of prior technology iterations, enterprise asset management, EAM, or CMMS. This is the newest and latest convergence of technology that spans maintenance all the way into the capital projects and planning and portfolio of the equipment. And then it also includes on the far right, workplace experience management. And that really gets to those last couple of risks that Alessandro was talking about. Employees are expecting more. One of the things that happened during COVID was, employees were given tools. In a lot of cases, we pulled them together very quickly out of necessity, maybe tools to reserve a space certain days a week. Or to connect with their colleagues, even though they weren't going to be physically in the same location at the same time. And it has fueled the desire for employees to feel more connected. Nuvolo's go-to-market approach is all around what we call the connected workplace. And we are focused on empowering you and your employees with a single set of applications that manage the entire life cycle of your assets. And for us, we look at anything as an asset. It can go both very small down to small pieces of equipment or controllers, and it can go as big as the actual building itself and everything in between. And that's really the core of our asset and maintenance application, which is kind of at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock on the clock face here on the right. That underpins everything that we do. And it ties really closely with the BMS that Alessandro was talking about before, because the BMS is actually controlling many of those assets. We're now looking at how do we maintain them and how do we track them over their full life cycle, which enables us to do the other things around the circle here. Looking at capital planning and capital projects. So taking all of that maintenance cost information and being able to roll it up into compelling financial decision matrices around repair versus replace, for example, and then executing projects around that. At the very top of this circle, we can take that into the real estate portfolio. So many companies, if not most, are reassessing their real estate portfolios today, and they don't have good tools that come all the way back down to the asset level information as a foundation for it to make determinations of where they should grow, expand, contract, relocate their real estate portfolio and assets. And then we also talked about space and workplace. This is all about the employee experience. So making sure people feel comfortable in the building, giving them tools to do things like reservations, to do things like report an issue in a conference room. We all know how frustrating that can be when you show up for a meeting, an in-person meeting, and the projection, the audio visual isn't working, or the HVAC is not set at the right level and it's too hot or it's too cold. Space and workplace really empowers employees to report those things straight away and get them resolved faster. And all of this will flow into our sustainability and energy application. So if you're running all of these things within Nuvolo, you'll start to be able to get a handle on how much energy are we using at a building, at a floor, and at an equipment level to start making sustainability plans and report that information. And at the end of the day, Nuvolo's core is asset data. And this is really, data is the new oil across pretty much all businesses and areas. But particularly when we talk about smart buildings, they need that data to enable the building to learn and to improve its performance over time, as we talked about in the definition earlier. And with integrating into the IWMS, the Nuvolo Connected Workplace, you can manage that full asset inventory and its history, including all of the maintenance costs. You can start to move to predictive and condition-based maintenance. And this is an area where we're working closely with Trane, specific to Trane equipment, to get more information directly from the equipment, to compare multiple instances of the same piece of equipment, for example, to see how they're all performing and optimize them. We can automatically trigger work orders. This is a big one, so that we are sending out work orders as soon as we're aware. We're going to talk about that in a couple of the examples later. I talked about repair versus replace, looking at the cost down at an equipment level to inform those capital plans. And ultimately, this is reducing downtime of the equipment, which will ultimately drive cost savings through maintenance reduction, as well as lifetime extension, usable life extension on your equipment. And workplace data, likewise, is key and critical to a smart building approach. So it's one thing to know about the assets themselves and the maintenance around them. That is very important, and it's a large expense for any building. But looking at workplace data, you can really start to analyze utilization versus output. So that 12% of energy being potentially wasted, much of that can be attributed to, empty floors in buildings, or hybrid work environments where we're not optimizing the space. So we might only have a third of the workforce in the building on any given day, but we're still heating and cooling all of the floors and all of the spaces. This is one that Trane's leadership talks about quite a lot in terms of green for green. We're not only doing it to be better for the environment, but also to save money in terms of having a comfortable environment, but focusing it where it's most needed, and optimizing the utilization. This drives up the occupancy rates. Obviously, we want to be cooling and heating the spaces that are most occupied, and maybe having different settings for other parts of the building, which ultimately will support your ESG initiatives in terms of reducing emissions, and will also save money. That's where the green for green is. So hopefully that helped give a little sense of how connecting and integrating components that you may already have in your buildings together can drive benefit, productivity, and cost savings. Let's talk about now, what can you do about this? How can you be opportunistic in moving forward? And there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to read through every piece of it. The key message here is that you can do all kinds of smaller initiatives within each of these different areas. So within your BAS or your BMS, how you can change schedules and controls. Within IWMS, how you can track your assets, optimize space utilization, use the information that's in these tools that you probably already have, even if they are standalone, to start to make improvements. And what our information shows, and a report where this was generated, is that any of these relatively low effort initiatives can have high returns in terms of optimizations, somewhere between 5% and 20% return, without requiring a full rip and replace strategy. So I'm sure many of these things may be activities that you're undertaking now, or thinking about. Lighting retrofits, upgrades to the envelope. Like, these are things that you can make incremental improvements on, and work towards connecting these pieces of both technology, equipment together in a smart building controller to give you, to start to enable the building to make some of these decisions on its own. And this might be the most important slide in terms of the encouragement of how to capitalize these investments. These types of connected equipment and controllers help enable and build out the smart building infrastructure, again, without having to do a rip and replace. And the bubble here really says it all, that every dollar that's invested in building modernization returns an average of $3 of operational savings over 5 years. I don't know many CFOs out there that would turn down that kind of return, particularly from an operational perspective. So it's how do you take capital initiatives, capital investments, capital equipment spend, and turn that into operational savings, which you're going to generate over time. A good example is Symbio-equipped rooftop units that have seamless integration, have smarter performance from a monitoring and optimization standpoint, which all of these things drive to lower life cycle costs, which gets at that operational savings. If you don't need as many corrective maintenance or even preventive maintenance on a piece of equipment, if it can run and have a longer useful life, all of these things drive towards turning a dollar of prevention into 3 pounds of cure, with a little bit of a medical analogy there, but turning those investment dollars into real operational savings. So with that, let's talk about a few examples in terms of bridging the gap. Nuvolo allows you to expand these smart building capabilities that you already have today. What we love to say is, your building is talking. You just need to listen to it and empower your teams with tools that can help with that. So telemetry data is very important, and we can auto-generate work orders based on alarms that are coming through. And we say with parameters because that's usually the most important part. We're not proposing to raise work orders every time an alarm goes, because often there are many of those. But we can help triage and determine when we actually do need to kick off a work order. Maybe it's even to an external vendor that we need to have come and look at a piece of equipment, and we can direct that to them straight away. And ultimately, this is going to help reduce spend by looking at your utilization and allocation data to inform those capital investments that we were just talking about. And likewise, kind of bringing it full circle to the employee, we want to create that employee-friendly environment. And believe me, employees do notice this. I'm sure you all hear from employees in your facilities regularly. It brings a much better environment when you have a comfortable building that really makes people feel like they're in a healthy environment to do their best work. So let's talk about a couple of Nuvolo and Trane customers and how they've really put this into action. So I'm gonna ask Alessandro to talk about a Trane customer here.
Yes, thank you, Ethan. So I guess everything that we presented so far, it's probably great information and makes sense, but you might be asking, okay, but what can I practically do with my building, right? That is maybe 20-year-old. Where do I go from here, right? So this first example really speaks to that, right? It's an actual customer in Canada. It's a larger shopping center with an aging infrastructure that started having issues with the communication of the different part of the system, right? And realized that it was time to do something about, but at the same time, they had very limited CapEx, very limited, investment dollar to spend, at least all at once, right? So what we did, we developed essentially a phased approach, right? Where we started in phase one with a relatively minimum investment, focus on upgrading the supervisory control infrastructure, right? And bringing that information into a modern BMS, and also overlaying our wireless network called AirFi. We have arguably the best wireless technology in the control space, right? So we overlay that wireless network to the existing wiring infrastructure, right, to provide that redundancy. And then over time, in subsequent phases, right, as the customer was able to allocate more investment dollar, we progressively upgraded the rest of the system, particularly the unit control that are attached to individual subsystem, right? So this happened over a number of years. And over time, we were able to meet the budget requirements of the customer, and the customer was extremely happy and they saw real ROI in the form of energy savings, in the form of reduced maintenance, because they were having significant cost before to maintain this aging infrastructure, right? So those maintenance costs went down, right? And so significant benefits across the board and a very happy customer in the end. So this is a very practical example of what you could do if you are facing a similar situation with limited capital, but still with a clear desire to upgrade to achieve some of these benefits.
Thanks, Alessandro. I'm going to talk about a couple of Nuvolo customers who've had similar success. The first one here is a Fortune 100 oil and gas company that has focused on integrating their IWMS, being Nuvolo, Nuvolo's connected workplace, with their their building automation system, their BAS. And they've done this in the way a critical alarm is identified in their BAS. A third-party technician acknowledges it. So there is a human involved to make sure that we're not sending out things too quickly or too many, or using parameters that don't make sense. And then as soon as the technician acknowledges that, it passes that across to Nuvolo via the integration. And based on that alarm and the asset data, which is auto-populated by Nuvolo, that work order is automatically created. And what that allows both the customer and their third-party technicians to better understand is how these alarms are generating work orders, and how this associated work affects their ability to meet a pretty strict SLA that they have in place with this customer. And this has also helped them to increase the asset lifespan. It gives them insight into that asset performance, as well as the maintenance that's being done on it. And this has really driven ROI through a 90% adherence to the SLA of third-party technicians. And ultimately SLAs are supposed to be a good thing. Often we look at them as kind of a negative of not meeting an SLA. But ultimately, when you're able to adhere to the SLAs in a contract, like for technician maintenance services, that's ultimately good for everyone. It means that the customer is getting what they are contracted to get, and it means that the vendor is able to provide it on a consistent basis. And this is estimated to save them 10 to 30% on the useful life of their critical assets. And it does bear saying they're focusing this on critical assets. Not every asset within their portfolio or their buildings would have this type of tight control around it, but it is those critical assets that can truly affect their business when it comes to downtime and when it comes to useful life. Another one of our customers is a Fortune 100 retailer, and they have integrated Nuvolo's Connected Workplace into their digital twin application, which also includes their BAS. And this is in their headquarters, not in their retail locations, which is probably worth noting. And similarly to the example above, a critical alarm comes in and is routed to a technician to address the issue. The work order is created, so we're doing this more quickly. But we're also getting utilization metrics via occupancy sensors, which are integrated into their digital twin. So now we can actually look at, this customer is able to look at their maintenance, their asset performance, along with utilization and occupancy data. So to see maybe a piece of equipment, a chiller, for example, is seeing higher usage and higher maintenance because it is servicing parts of the building that are the most highly occupied. And that would be a good correspondence. Likewise, if you were seeing the opposite of that, a piece of equipment that is requiring lots of maintenance, but it's servicing a part of the building that has very low occupancy, that would be a real question of, how should we be optimizing the way that we are heating and cooling our occupied versus unoccupied spaces and managing that heating cooling load. And And this has really helped this customer manage their employee comfort. They are still doing quite a lot of hybrid work, as many companies are, and they can create this the comfort environment while managing the peak office utilization days from the information that they're getting out of their digital twin. So again, think to the slide that we talked about earlier. These different pieces all contribute to ROI and operational savings, and when you connect them together, you're going to get a multiplying effect. So the ROI here is reduced critical asset downtime by 25%. That's pretty massive. A quarter of their critical asset downtime has been reduced. Employee satisfaction is up 10%, and they've still reduced utility spend by 15%. So when you put all three of those ROI metrics together, it's quite a powerful story. So the last thing that we're going to talk about here as we get towards the end is, how do you start? And this is a pretty useful graphic to kind of look at and be practical about how you move from, unconnected to just connected to, truly smart and future ready. And as we talked about throughout, any building can benefit from smarter solutions. So don't think that you have to be aiming for the far right of this graphic to generate value. Remember, 50% of the buildings per the BISRIA study have older equipment and almost no connectivity. You can find solutions in your HVAC controls, your thermostats, your BAS, in the service agreements that you have around them, and starting to get into the enterprise asset management and IWMS world. That's where you start to get into that first step of integration that we talked about at the outset. And as you move to the right, you're essentially bringing more and more components into that connected ecosystem and environment. So moving into an integrated multi-system BMS, connecting into that IWMS, moving to cloud connectivity with connected mechanical service agreements that Trane offers, the Ensemble product suite, and even starting to look at things like IoT and building level analytics. That takes time, and we definitely recommend you start, you prioritize and start with your most critical spaces and equipment first, and then start to move all the way to the right, where Trane really has the broadest capabilities, from equipment to controls to services to digital enablement, which we've been talking about today, to really turn your building into a fully smart, future-ready building. So in summary, begin with the end in mind. Think about that far right, but don't try to go there tomorrow. Work there over time and build value as you're going. Engage your stakeholders and define your requirements clearly. Oftentimes, executives who need to sign off on large capital expenditure are going to get lost in the detail if you were trying to list out every one of those technologies on the far right column. But if you set realistic timeframes to focus on the critical pieces first, you can bring those incremental return and continue to generate the support and the executive support to continue investing in foundational technologies that'll set you up for long-term flexibility and continuing to move forward from that investment perspective. Leverage your built-in automation and programming of tools that you have today. Nothing makes people happier than saying, hey, I can make the technology that we have today do more for us. And that's a really good place to start when you're more on the left side of that spectrum before. Map out your safeguards. I know I've seen maybe a couple of things in the questions coming up talking about security. Cybersecurity is very important these days. Make sure you are looking at those and mitigate those risks everywhere you can, as Alessandro talked about. And then seek out collaborators who can give you comprehensive help, training, documentation, strategic partners like Trane and Nuvolo that are here to help you along that journey. And And those are the key points that you should keep in mind as you start down the smart building journey. And with that, we will transition over to our question and answer portion.
Thanks, Ethan. We do have some questions from the audience that I'm going to pose to both you and Alessandro. The first question is directed at you, Alessandro, and the question is it possible to integrate existing infrastructure with these advanced AI-driven systems?
Yes, that's a great question, and the answer is yes, absolutely. It is possible. I think the critical thing to do if you have an older infrastructure, especially older controls, is to first and foremost upgrade your supervisory control, right? So the equipment unitary control can maybe stay in place, but upgrading the supervisory control, and most importantly, making sure that that supervisory control is then connected, because by definition, any digital offering or AI offering tends to run on the cloud, right? So you need to be connected. So by upgrading the supervisory control and then connecting that to the cloud, you can now deploy new digital offerings, including AI, even to older systems, right? So it's absolutely possible. In fact, quite frankly, we do that all the time for our customers.
Great. Thanks, Alessandro. The next question is directed towards Ethan, and I know we talked about oil and gas companies specifically in our case study, but Khaled has asked, and just to be a little bit more specific, is it possible to integrate the Nuvolo system with oil and gas companies that have strict internal security systems?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is something that we see every day. So Nuvolo's history was industry aligned, and regulated industries is an area that we focus on heavily. So we do understand the requirements and the compliance and regulatory and cybersecurity risks and stringencies that exist. It doesn't mean that it would be as easy as other environments, but our software is cloud-based, open API structure. We also adhere to a number of certification standards, ISO standards, SOC 2, SOC 1 and 2, actually. So in most cases, it is possible. We need to spend a little bit of time with your IT leaders to understand what those specific restrictions may be. We also run on, I know we haven't talked about it here, and we're not spending a ton of time in the technical details, but the Nuvolo application suite sits on top of the ServiceNow platform, which is a best-in-class SaaS platform that meets pretty much every standard, including U.S. federal government standard for operating safely in a cloud environment. So I think it is definitely possible, and it's something that we'd be happy to have some more detailed conversations with you about.
Great. Thank you, Ethan. This next question is also directed to you. Chanaka has asked, how can facility management teams demonstrate ROI to leadership when transitioning from traditional CMMSs to intelligent platforms like Nuvolo? Can you give a few examples?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's one that we get asked quite often. Most organizations have something in place today, like a CMMS. Many of those are aging and really aren't providing the value. I would say there's a couple of things that come into play here, depending on your industry. Often the compliance requirements, particularly in health and life sciences, in oil and gas, and other heavily regulated industries, are requiring more in terms of information and in terms of compliance and security requirements. Most older systems can't meet those easily. So one of the things to do is to actually look at your ongoing operational costs for your existing system. It's something that often gets buried in IT budgets, but aging systems, just like aging HVAC systems, aging technology systems also require more cost and maintenance to maintain. So I would strongly recommend looking at that. And then the forward-looking view is that you can do so much more with an integrated workplace management suite than you can with an aging CMMS. So you bring the asset information onto the floor plan. So if you're sending a technician to work on a piece of equipment, they can actually see the floor map and where that piece of equipment sits. Likewise, if an employee reports an issue, you know exactly where that is, either by where they are in the building from an assigned space perspective. You can use QR codes throughout the building. We see these sometimes in conference rooms now. You scan the QR code and immediately submit a maintenance request. And even things like wayfinding within the building. Many employees haven't spent as much time in the offices as they used to, and helping them locate where they need to be is a relatively simple use case, but it's one that makes a big difference to employees. So it's really moving from asset data just for maintenance into asset data as the foundation for how you make your workplace a better place for employees and how you save money along the way.
Great. Thanks, Ethan. That was a great answer. Great response. We're coming up on our allowed time today. So I do want to thank everybody for spending an hour with us. I want to thank the presenters. And I do want to remind anybody, if you have any more questions, please reach out to Nuvolo. The URL you see on your screen right now. We're happy to answer anything. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for their time and have a good day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks all.